So, what if I told you that the worst economic disaster in modern history wasn't just about a stock market crash? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the Great Depression, dig into the hidden forces that brought the entire world to its knees, and see how the echoes of that time still shape our world today. Now, before we dive into all the charts and the economic theories, I think it's really important to remember the human side of this thing. John Steinbeck just captured the sheer desperation of the era perfectly. This wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. For millions of people, it was about survival. And that desperation Steinbeck wrote about, it was a feeling shared by millions. To really understand why, we've got to look at the numbers behind the crisis. The scale of the economic collapse was just staggering. And it all really started with one simple, devastating fact: the loss of jobs. 25%. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. At the peak of the Depression, back in 1933, a full quarter of the American workforce was unemployed. That's 1 out of every 4 people you'd meet on the street. Their lives, their families, just thrown into complete chaos. This wasn't just a statistic, it was a national tragedy. And this thing wasn't just an American problem. Oh no, it went viral, becoming this global pandemic of economic despair. Just look at these numbers. They're brutal. Industrial production, foreign trade. It's like they fell off a cliff everywhere. And while the U.S. saw that insane 600% jump in unemployment, countries like Germany and France saw their job markets absolutely decimated too. The world's economies were all tied together in this terrible chain reaction of collapse. So what lit the fuse on this whole global powder keg? You know, the story we all hear usually starts with the famous stock market crash of 1929. But here's the thing. That was just the first domino in a long, devastating line. Let's trace how this whole thing went down. In just a few chaotic days in October 1929, the market absolutely hemorrhaged value. You had Black Thursday, Black Monday, Black Tuesday. Fortunes that took lifetimes to build were just gone, wiped out. But here's the most crucial point. The crash didn't cause the Great Depression all by itself. It was more like a massive flare that suddenly lit up all the deep, dangerous cracks that were already there in the global financial system. So how does a stock market crash spiral into a decade of misery? Well, an economist named Irving Fisher had this brilliant idea he called the debt deflation spiral. Okay, picture this. Panic hits. So what does everyone do? They rush to sell all their assets, stocks, property, you name it, to pay off their debts. But when everyone sells at once, prices collapse. That's deflation. And with falling prices, businesses can't make money. So they go bankrupt, they lay off their workers, which causes even more panic. And this cycle just keeps feeding on itself, dragging the economy deeper and deeper into the abyss. But even that vicious cycle of debt deflation doesn't fully explain the sheer devastation and, maybe more importantly, the length of the Great Depression. I mean, a recession was probably coming, but what turned it into a decade-long nightmare? That is the central question that has kept economists arguing for generations. So what was the real flaw in the system? Was it a failure of spending? Or was it a failure of the money supply itself? Two major schools of thought popped up to answer this very question, and honestly, they point in completely different directions. And this chart really breaks down the two big arguments. So on one side, you have the Keynesian view. They argue the real problem was just a catastrophic loss of confidence. People and businesses got terrified, so they just stopped spending and investing. They call it a collapse in aggregate demand. The whole economic engine just seized up. But on the other side, you've got the monetarist view. They look at this and say, nope, it wasn't about feelings, it was about the cash. They point the finger directly at the Federal Reserve for allowing the actual money supply in the country to shrink by a third, basically starving the economy to death. Okay, let's zoom back out to that global picture again. Because, as we said, this American crisis didn't stay in America. It spread across the world with terrifying speed, mostly through a system that was, ironically, designed to create stability. And that system was the gold standard. Now, what it did was essentially link the world's major currencies together. But during this crisis, it acted more like a pair of economic handcuffs. When the U.S. economy started to sink, the gold standard basically forced other countries to import that same deflationary pressure. It stopped them from being able to cut their own interest rates or expand their money supply to fight back. They were trapped. And just when you thought things couldn't get any worse, countries decided to start a global trade war. The U.S. fired the first shot with something called the Smoot-Hawley tariff. The goal was to protect American industries. Well, it backfired. Spectacularly. Other countries immediately retaliated with their own tariffs, and pretty soon the whole world was caught in this destructive loop. And the result? Global trade, the lifeblood of the world economy, just got choked off, collapsing by more than half. The result of all this was a global jobs catastrophe. The devastation was just immense. We talked about the US hitting 25% unemployment, but look at Germany. Already struggling with war reparations, they got hit even harder, reaching a staggering 30%. And that level of economic despair had huge political consequences, most famously paving the way for the rise of the Nazi Party. So how in the world did we finally climb out of this hole? Well, the recovery was a long, painful process. It was driven by some radical new policies and, in the end, by another global catastrophe. Right here in the US, you can see this dramatic shift in thinking. First, you had the Hoover administration, which took a more hands-off approach. The belief was that confidence would return and that a balanced budget was key. But when Franklin D. Roosevelt took office, everything changed. He launched the New Deal, which was this massive experiment in active government intervention. We're talking huge public works programs, major financial reforms, and the creation of social safety nets like Social Security. But here's the thing. The New Deal, for all its ambition, wasn't a magic wand. It provided absolutely vital relief, and it definitely helped turn the tide, but it couldn't fully heal the economy. A decade after the crash, on the very brink of World War II, unemployment in the US was still a painful 15%. So what finally ended the Great Depression? Well, the answer is kind of shocking, and it's simple: war. By 1943, an unbelievable 67% of all capital investment in the United States was being funded by the government for the war effort. This was a level of government spending that just made the New Deal look like a drop in the bucket. And that's pretty much the consensus view among historians. The immense, all-out economic mobilization for World War II acted as the ultimate stimulus package. It put every factory back to work, it pulled millions of people into the military and war industries, and it effectively wiped out unemployment, finally closing the book on the Great Depression. You know, the Great Depression was a crucible. It forged the modern world, and it completely changed our understanding of economics and the role of government forever. So it leaves us with a really crucial question to think about. What are the lessons from back then that are most relevant for the economic challenges we're all facing right now?